Let's face it, hiring help is not easy these days. Let XenTegra Staffing help you find the right person for the right job. Head over to XenTegra.com/XenTegra Staffing to find out more and let us staff your people needs. Welcome to another Citrix Session with your host, Andy Whiteside and Bill Sutton, your source for all things Citrix.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 26 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside, and I have with me Bill Sutton, Director of Services for XenTegra. How's it going this week, Bill?
Going well, Andy. Thank you.
Do we have one session this week or two? Just one, isn't it?
I think it's just one. Yep, just one.
Again, just to kind of recap the idea, you and I feel like there's a need to take the blogs that show up on the Citrix site and other sites that are highly Citrix related and kind of go through those in kind of a verbal format. One, so that we can give people a different way to consume the content, as well as a way for you and I to force ourselves to have conversations around, some of these blogs that we really need to be talking about with each other anyway.
Absolutely.
Well, we're fortunate today to have Miguel Contreras.
Contreras. Yep.
Contreras. Sorry about that. We talked about everything except how to pronounce your last name before we got started.
It's all good.
So Miguel is a senior product manager at Citrix based out of Fort Lauderdale. Miguel, what's your background?
Yeah, so I'm a longtime Citrite. I've been with Citrix for about 12 years now. Prior to joining the product team, which I did in about 18 to 20 months ago, I was actually part of the Citrix consulting team, where I spent about 10 years, I was a field resource, basically deploying our virtualization and networking technologies with, our various customers across the country.
So you actually know how the stuff works, and you've been on the hook for making it work in the past. That's always a good start.
Yep.
I guess you could tell it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine when I talk to technical people who have never actually had to implement stuff that, it's all theoretical. I like people who have turned wrenches.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely pretty important to understand, the product, not only how it works and what it does, but, also the, in my opinion, understanding the customer side of things, right? How customers operate, their requirements, considerations around just IT operations in general. And because I think those are all very important things to consider when thinking of improvements and new features and whatnot is, how are customers going to be able to deploy this and use it? So,
and in this case, we're going to get kind of technical in this podcast. So hopefully, having real world experience, seeing how things come together is going to help us articulate for folks what it is we're talking about.
Sure thing.
Well, let's jump into it. The title of this blog from March 10th of this year is ICA, Independent Computing Architecture, and Gateway Service Rendezvous now available. I love that you put the acronym ICA in the title of this and not HDX, right? Because last week or the week before, whatever it was, where we hammered home ICA is still alive and well, and should be talked about. And if anybody says HDX, they're just really talking about some form of what ICA is doing under the covers.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, ICA is definitely not going anywhere. And HDX is really just the umbrella term for everything that happens within that ICA session. So all the technologies that we provide for, device, remoting, graphics, and everything within that. That's really what it refers to.
I usually give people a pass when they say HDX protocol, because that really probably is the new marketing name, right? But when they know enough to add that piece on the end to talk about what part of HDX they're really trying to articulate, that's when I go along with it. Other than that, call it ICA in front of me at least.
Yep, I agree.
All right, so you start off here in the article talking about the challenge and what you're doing and how you're, what you're the reason why you're having to add this into the product mix. You want to explain to the audience what it is that was the previous situation that you're now solving with this new solution?
Sure. So the thing here is, the target of this particular enhancement is really a scenario where you use a gateway service. The cloud-hosted Citrix Gateway, if you will. And basically, by default, what happens out of the box is when you use a gateway service, the ICA traffic will go from the VDA. It'll have to be proxied through the cloud connector before it can make it out to the gateway in the cloud. As you can imagine, there's, first of all, that differs from the on-premises scenario where when you have an on-premises gateway to provide remote access to your VDAs, the traffic goes from the VDA to the gateway, from the gateway to the user, which provides minimal hops. Definitely the less hops, the better. Reduces latency and any issues in between related to multiple hops and devices and whatnot. On the gateway service side, due to the way that everything was architected initially, we had to provide a proxy through the cloud connector, primarily because we needed to provide security to that traffic. So when we proxy the session through the cloud connector had the ability to provide a secure connection between the customer's data center and the gateway appliance out in the internet. So the problem with this is the cloud connector has a limitation of being able to proxy up to 1,000 ICA sessions, and depending on how many VDAs your environment has, or how many concurrent users you're looking to serve with gateway service, the larger environment, the greater the requirements for cloud connectors in your environment, right? Once you start talking about several thousand users that have to go access the environment via the gateway service, now you're looking at several cloud connectors that you need to maintain in your environment. This, of course, number one, introduces more infrastructure that you need to maintain. So operationally, can become complicated. This also, increases the cost of the solution overall. In depending on where these cloud connectors are hosted, it could be more or less in terms of cost. But the biggest problem here really is the potential for affecting the performance of the session as well. There's been situations where based on the customer's specific architecture, you have cloud connectors that are not necessarily co-located with the VDAs. And so the additional latency between VDAs and cloud connectors is definitely not beneficial. So what does Rendezvous do? Rendezvous allows the ICA connection to actually bypass the cloud connector on the way out. And so that way, it'll go directly from the VDA to the gateway, and then from the gateway to the user. So similar to how the on-premises gateway functions.
So Miguel, I'm struggling trying to wrap my head around that. So I've got a VDA that's in my data center, and it's somehow going to talk to the subnet IP of your gateway service. Maybe are you going to go into specifically how that works here in a minute? So basically, there is we provide via the Citrix Cloud platform a number of public URLs that are used to be able to connect to the various services. And this is not it's no different with the gateway service itself. So the way I guess to think of it is when you look at an ICA file, so say you go to Workspace or Storefront and you click on a resource, Workspace or Storefront will give you an ICA file. And if you've ever looked at the contents of the ICA file when you're using Gateway, on-premises Gateway, the address that's provided to connect to for that ICA file is the URL for the gateway.
So in here, it's really no different. It'll show you the URL of the public URL for that gateway. Mm-hmm. So it functions exactly the same as far as receiver or workspace app is concerned. Is I'm just connecting through a gateway appliance. Here's a URL, and you will also see the STA ticket associated with it to be able to validate the session. So you're showing right now in your screen the blog post that I put out when this was released, and I don't have the details here in this blog post of what those URLs are. But if you look at the documentation, we actually have a little more detail on what those URLs are. And basically, what really needs from a communication standpoint, all that you really need to make this work is make sure that the VDA can talk to those specific URLs in the cloud infrastructure.
No, that makes sense. I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking through it quite well enough, but that definitely makes sense. And hey, Bill, do you want to jump in? I'm sure you may have some deeper technical questions on this.
Just a little bit. So when the user initiates a session, they're clicking on the icon in the workspace. That is then going through the cloud connector and picking the appropriate VDA. And then what you're saying is the VDA then returns the ICA file like it normally would in a storefront on-prem environment, returning the ICA file, but it's basically putting in the public address of the gateway service versus the public address of the cloud connector or something along those lines.
That is correct.
Okay. So the traffic flow is still the same when you initiate the session, but when you select the app, the traffic flow downstream is the same. It's the upstream traffic flow that changes.
So that's a great question. So from a client perspective, everything is exactly the same. Okay. On the back end, it's a little different. So when we look back at the on-premises solution with Gateway, everything is exactly as you described. Once the client receives that ICA file and tries to establish a connection, all the traffic basically goes downstream from there, from the client to the gateway, from gateway to the VDA.
Right.
When we're using Rendezvous, something a little different happens in the back end. So from a client perspective, it's the same. The client will try to establish a connection with the gateway. In the back end, however, there will be no downstream connection from the gateway to the VDA. Instead, the VDA actually initiates a connection directly with the gateway.
Oh, okay.
And so it changes the way that connection to the VDA is instantiated for that session. Okay. The reason for that is, at this point, what that allows us to use that allows us to provide TLS encryption for the session end to end. And by having the gateway serve as the server, there is no longer a requirement to provide a certificate on the VDA. Because at that point, the VDA becomes a client and just consumes whatever is available on the server side. So all we have to worry about is, managing our certificates on our control plane, which we control, and then that's zero work for the customer. And it's obviously because it's ours, we can manage it, we can maintain it, and there's no problem there. And so basically what happens is once that connection is initiated from both endpoints, so the client and the VDA, they both meet or, rendezvous at the gateway. They meet there and establish that connection. And that, establishes a session for the user.
Well, I wondered why it was called Rendezvous, and you just answered that question when you used the term relative to the gateway being the rendezvous point, as it were. Yeah.
I'm just disappointed you guys took away my my joke I was going to use. That I was just now understanding why you're calling it Rendezvous.
Yeah. There's definitely a reason for that.
Well, that makes it pretty simple. I guess the one concern I would have is now there's it's kind of like meeting a friend, somewhere in Manhattan, right? You kind of got to plan it to be there together. I guess there's enough communication these days so that if something's amiss, you can get on the same page and make sure that that rendezvous happens.
Yes. Yeah, there is definitely a lot of coordination that goes there. So when you broker the session, part of that is figuring out which point of presence is going to be used for that session. So that information is provided both to the client, obviously to the client, as well as the VDA, so they know exactly where to send that connection request.
And since we're using TLS, there's no firewall ports. It's all outbound. Yeah.
Yeah. So the requirement there is really only to allow TCP traffic, or in the future UDP traffic as well, on port 443 from the VDA out to the gateway. Depending on what your security requirements are, you can just open that up, to the internet. Or if you are looking to be a little more security conscious and granular about your security policies, you can specify the target URLs that you would allow that traffic to go to, which we do provide the details on what those URLs need to be, so that way you know that only traffic to that specific target is allowed to go out on that port.
So I'm curious, and this is actually a scenario that we're on the consulting side looking to get into soon. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, just for a quick example, if you don't mind, let's assume that we've got a CVAD environment hosted in Citrix Cloud that happens to be in Central Europe, but we've got a client, a VDA location and cloud connectors that are in the US. Obviously, I would prefer, if I'm in the US, that connection use a gateway service point of presence in the US versus in Central Europe. Does this accomplish that through the logic that's in the environment? Assuming you'd have the appropriate policies in Workspace, I presume.
Yes. So all of our point of presence for gateway service are basically load balanced via GSLB, always proximity based. So whichever point of presence is closest to the user, that's what we pick.
Okay. I kind of thought that might be the answer, but I wanted to confirm that for the audience.
Yeah, and also the other thing to mention there is that we, from a gateway service perspective, we have points of presence both on Azure and AWS. But the hosting platform is really agnostic. So whichever one happens to be the best option for that specific session will be picked, regardless of whether it's Azure or AWS.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Miguel, you may get to this later, but Bill and I are big UDP fans. The Enlightened Display Transport Protocol, I guess that's out of the moment. That's coming.
It is in the roadmap. So we have we're hoping to start a tech preview soon of EDT on gateway service. And actually, one of the reasons why there was a little bit of delay there is because in order to be able to use EDT through the gateway service, we require Rendezvous. So we needed to wait for Rendezvous to finally be available before we could continue the work on EDT support on gateway service. But there is a tech preview planned for later this year, and hopefully we'll have GA as well later in the year. So that's the plan.
Okay, great. Hey, so let's jump into the requirements section here. You did my favorite thing, which is throwing the bullets, right? I wish I could just have every conversation in bullets. People who know me know how direct I am and how quickly I like to get things done. It's a blessing and a curse. But you have some requirements here. You want to go through these bullets?
Sure thing. Okay, so we'll just start right there at the top. So right now, from a control plane perspective, we only provide Rendezvous support if you're using the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Service, so Citrix Cloud solution. From a VDA version perspective, you need at least 1912, which is the latest LTSR. And then obviously, any version after that is supported as well. You also need to configure reverse lookup zones and DNS for your VDAs. And the reason behind this is that when the brokers broker a session, part of the information that's provided is the IP address of the VDA. However, because we need to provide a secure connection, via TLS encryption, we need to use FQDNs instead of IP addresses for all this stuff. So when the cloud connector receives the information with the machine IP, it needs to be able to translate that to an FQDN that can be used for that connection. So that's a reasoning for that there.
And Miguel, with the idea of just putting a host file in your master image, that's fine, right? That's good enough?
No. So actually, the reverse translation needs to be available to the cloud connectors themselves.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So those are the ones that need to be able to translate the VDA IP to a VDA address or FQDN.
But I guess the same comment applies there. Could you just do that through a host file on the connector?
Yeah, I mean, technically you could. but just keep in mind that you have tens, hundreds, or thousands of VDAs. So I'm not sure that you can manage that many host entries in every single one cloud connector. You can if you want to, but
no, you just
luck to you.
You just ruined that one for me. We'll move on.
Yep. But yeah, so that's the reason behind that. The last and probably most critical part here is the SSL Cipher Suites order. So the VDA itself supports very specific cipher suites used for encryption of ICA traffic, and those cipher suites are the 3 that are listed here. You actually see 6 items listed, and that's because we're basically specifying each cipher suite with 2 different curves, curves P384 and P256. So basically what we need to do here, the reason for specifying the order is so that the operating system, when negotiating the session, only provides these as acceptable options when establishing that secure connection. Otherwise, the operating system might negotiate with a different cipher suite. And then what happens there is when the VDA tries to establish that secure connection, it will see a cipher suite that it doesn't support, and the rendezvous connection will fail. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean that this user will not get a session. What happens is rendezvous fails and then falls back to proxying the session through the cloud connector. So you still have a session establishment there, but you will not be able to use rendezvous.
And Miguel, the whole thing here, which we haven't even said, which is amazing, we've gotten this far and I haven't said, is this has a chance to improve user experience, right? We take one mix and that's the whole goal in all of this, right?
Yes, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I was just talking to a colleague a couple of days ago with a customer that recently upgraded their VDAs to 1912. They were experiencing some issues with performance with some of their workers working remotely. As a result of the whole coronavirus crisis, they had to move a bunch of people to work remotely, and they happened to be, they were not initially thought of as a user base that would work remotely at any point. And so they're scrambling to get all their stuff ready for them. And because of the way things were architected, the cloud connectors were not close to those VDAs. So there was an extra amount of latency that was introduced for that use case. So anyway, long story short, they were able to get VDAs upgraded to 1912, enable rendezvous, and that cut the latency for the connection in half. So, and they were looking at something around 150 milliseconds without rendezvous. And once that got enabled, it, cut down to about, around 60 on average, maybe. So, that 60 millisecond difference in latency can be a big difference for certain use cases.
Well, and when you think about our modern day world where things are based on services and software, that's something you couldn't have done back in the old days. Now, you update the software, you have new options, you point it, you take the path of least resistance or distance, and you solve the challenge. That's a pretty good example of the world we live in today.
Yep.
Hey, Bill, thoughts or questions around these requirements?
Not at this point, no.
Okay. All right, Miguel, let's walk kind of through the second half of this article.
Sure thing. So, all right. So, how do you enable Rendezvous? So Rendezvous has basically 2 switches. The first one is a feature toggle on the Citrix Cloud Control Plane, which it is by default enabled for everybody. So you don't really have to worry about it. It's just something to be aware of in case something ever comes up. The second part of it is a HDX policy setting. So within the CVAT policies, there is a setting called Rendezvous Protocol, which is disabled by default. And so in order to enable Rendezvous usage, you have to go create a policy that explicitly enables the protocol.
Okay.
The second point here is what if you need to proxy sessions for the cloud connector? How do you get around the scalability issues? So right now, really, it's, just business as usual as it was without Rendezvous. The cloud connector team is, constantly looking at ways to improve. So, hopefully, something that can be improved upon in the future. Next up, so proxies. Proxies is a topic that comes up quite often, actually, and understandably so, because they're pretty prevalent in a lot of networks, especially with the most security conscious customers that we have. So the main issue with proxies is that when you do deep packet inspection for HDX connections, it actually breaks the connection and causes Rendezvous to fail. And this is an issue that it's not really unique to us. This happens a lot also with other solutions. Like if you look at any voice over IP solutions that they've also been affected in the past by this type of packet inspection. And basically anything that modifies the traffic in transit can cause problems with this type of scenarios where you have live traffic, secure traffic that is sensitive to manipulation. So if you have proxies in your environment, really the best thing that you can do is just create exceptions for ICA traffic so that it is not manipulated in any way. Just let it through. And just to be clear there, when you create these exceptions for the VDA, they don't have to apply to every single communication stream that goes from the VDA to the internet. You should be able to do that on a per URL basis. So what the URLs are that you need for the gateway service, the port and the protocol. So you should be able to just create granular rules that are specific for that scenario.
And Miguel, I should probably point out here, this is all about optimization. This doesn't mean that going through the cloud connectors doesn't work. I mean, that's how everybody's been doing it, and most people,
right,
with the lightweight effectiveness of the ICA protocol, has been doing it without problem. This is just taking it to the next level, right?
Yes, exactly. The cloud connector as it exists today, it's not going to stop working. Like you said, this is a matter of trying to optimize the performance of ICA sessions going through gateway service, as well as trying to simplify the infrastructure management overhead of the solution as a whole.
Yeah. I think we've covered this topic, but if it doesn't work at the Rendezvous, like if they don't meet up, what happens?
It falls back to the traditional proxy to cloud connector method, which is your out-of-box behavior. So it will continue to work.
And in the next section of the document, you call out the internet connectivity requirements, and you point to a different document. Can you just at a high level
yes,
call out what those are?
Yep, it's pretty straightforward. You basically just need to allow direct connectivity, direct connection from the VDA to the cloud gateway service URLs, so that that ICA traffic is able to reach the gateway and then establish the session with the users. It can be done very easily by whitelisting a URL that contains a wildcard and covers basically every single POP. We also have a list of all the different point of presence URLs if you want to be a little more granular. It's just a gateway service URL.
And then this part here, obviously you're a former consultant because you put in the article, how do you know if it's working, right?
Right.
Down at the bottom, you got the netstat command, which I think I must have run the netstat command looking for 2598 a million times in my life. But so how do people tell if they've implemented this correct and we're actually seeing the traffic flow through the rendezvous points?
Yeah, so if you are in a probably the easiest way to do it within the session itself, it's to either through a PowerShell or command prompt, just run the CTX session command. So CTX session -v to be specific, is -v is a verbose switch, and that will give you a whole bunch of statistics there about the session. The key thing that you're looking for in that output from CTX session is the local address, which will show 0.0.0.0. Yep, just as you have highlighted right there. If you see that as your local address, then you know that Rendezvous is being used. If you see something other than that, then you're going through the cloud connector. If you want to take a step further and do some additional validation, then you can run netstat as highlighted there, and you will see, under local address, your VDA's IP address, followed by the same port that is highlighted by the CTX session output. So in this example that I provided, CTX session showed 0.0.0.0 on port 5343. And if you run netstat, then basically what you're looking for under local address is the VDA's IP address followed by the same port. So in this case, it was 10.4.0.50, 5343 as a port.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's very referenceable in this blog, and I'm glad you put it in there.
Yeah, another, and I did not include this here. Maybe I can update the blog later to do it. But one question that I got asked a few times in the past is, how can I, tell if this is working from, from Director, for example, which is, definitely a valid question. And the way to do that is if you look under the connection details, there is a connected from address. You will see the gateway service public IP. So this is one of the fields there. If in the connected from address you see an internal IP, then that will tell you that your session is being proxied through a cloud connector.
Yeah, I was going to tell you not to worry about we'd do another blog session, but I guess that one would be very good to put a screenshot of that in
yes.
this for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll update the blog post to show that as well.
So Bill, before we jump out of the tech, any questions on any of that?
No, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's not what I thought it was, but it makes sense, and definitely I think will benefit a lot of customers.
Well, I think that highlights, the reason why you and I are doing these podcasts. I think someone mentioned this to us on another podcast the other day, and I think both of us immediately went into the world of the hairpinning, and that's not what this is, which is good to know. And this is it's good to see Citrix looking to continue to evolve the architecture to get some more optimal gains for the user experience. All right, so Miguel, any parting thoughts on this overall concept?
No. I mean, the only, my only comment here is really, anybody out there using the gateway service, please take a look at this, and try to get it enabled in your environment. Definitely, nothing but benefits from using this feature. As we said, improve performance and as well as reduce requirements on infrastructure to serve your users accessing remotely. So,
there's a lot of new technologies that you kind of want to stay away from for a while, and maybe people need to test this in their lab a little bit.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of a no-brainer. If you're already having people connect through the connectors, you might as well give this a shot for at least some of your delivery groups.
Absolutely.
All right, Bill. Anything on your side before we wrap up?
No, sir. I'm good.
All right. Well, I'm excited. I'm jumping off of here, and we're going to sign some documentation. We're going to put XenTegra digital solutions on the map. That's going to be our small to medium business offering to go along with what XenTegra already does, which we do a lot of SMB as it is. But we're going to get even more serious about that. So my day of conference calls is just going to keep rolling after this. All right, guys. I appreciate you jumping on. This has been very useful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks,
anytime.
Yeah.
All right, Miguel. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to the Citrix Session with your hosts, Andy Whiteside and Bill Sutton. A special thanks to our guests. Podcast produced by Pete Downing. Head over to XenTegra.com/podcast to listen to all podcasts in this series.